Yeah. Okay, good evening and welcome to the English Language Live session. This is the session for autumn 2023 for those of you doing the November resits. And what we're going to do tonight is we're going to go over the top tips for Unit 2 and Unit 3. I'm Miss Hales and tonight I'm working with Ms Davis and we're going to cover all the things that we can think of that you might want to know for your exam in November. If you can see the question and answer function while we're going through, please feel free to ask any questions and we'll try and answer those during the session. We'll be going for about 45 minutes, but we're going to record this. So if you feel like you miss anything out, you can always go back and watch it again. And tonight we're going to go over both Unit 2 and Unit 3 and covering tips for the reading and the writing. So hopefully by the end of today, you will be happy about the November reset. You'll be confident about the reading questions that you're going to have to face. You'll be aware of the criteria used by the examiner, and you'll be ready to answer the different styles of writing questions, which is what we're going to go through this evening. So I just thought it'd be handy again just to remind you what the paper looks like, and obviously it's a similar paper for Unit 2 and Unit 3. So we've got the English Language Unit 2, and the first thing you're going to have to check is that you've got the Unit 2 paper in front of you, and that is the one where you've got the editing in section A and the proofreading in section B. You're going to have to do reading and writing in both the papers, so you know you've got section A where you're going to have to do the reading and section B for the writing. The reading section is worth 40 marks. You've got an hour to do it. The writing section is worth 40 marks. You've got an hour to do that. Make sure you've got plenty of ballpoint pens and make sure that they're black. And then sometimes some highlighters can help you. Always look at the questions and look at the marks allocated so that you know how much you're being expected to write. So as a reminder, a really easy reminder, if you make your examiner's life easy, they're going to be marking your paper, they're going to be in a good mood. So read all the instructions on the front cover, use your black pen, fill in everything on the answer booklet, including the question numbers, and make sure you fill in every section that you've got. And then on the writing, on Unit 2, this is where you've got the one task, and this is where you get your choice of two, okay? All right, so it's description, narration, and exposition. This is what your topics are. And you know that you're going to be given a range of different texts. You're going to have between 5 and 7 texts, all on the same theme. So make sure you answer them carefully and make sure you relate those questions to each of the texts. So remember when it says text A, you only answer the questions on text A. And then when it says to text B, you change and you look at text B to answer the next questions. Always make sure you answer with enough points for the marks available. Okay, so in the exam now, you're going to have a range of different questions, which are going to vary from things like simple access location retrieval questions, things like your find and copy one piece of information, or when did the festival start, or where will the festival be next year. So those really simple find and copy questions, sometimes they're even multiple choice. You're going to have inference and deduction questions. You're going to have questions which are asking you what impression do you get of, and you've got to try and work it out by looking at the texts. Sometimes you're going to get some how questions, looking at the language. How does the writer persuade or how does the writer convince? You're going to get compare and contrast questions where you've got to compare and contrast two of the texts. You might be given a summary question, and obviously with the summary, you're going to be bringing it down. You're going to be shortening it, using your own words and making sure you've covered the main points. So summary is the one where you must make sure you do not use quotes. You've got to put that one in your own words. And then sometimes you're going to get the synthesizing information and you're going to have to try and look at the different texts and bring the information together. And then obviously you've got proofreading and editing as well. Okay, so in the exam, you can have a range of skills that you need to do. What I would say to you is really stop and reflect. You could pause now if you wanted to and then carry on playing it, or you could just stop this at another point and look back and say, right, do I know what these mean? And do I know how to do these things in an exam? And if you feel like any of those are a weakness for you, go back and have a look at the videos that we've already recorded for Unit 2 and Unit 3. Go back over and check through what you're doing. Okay, so here's a tip for you. When you get the question in the exam, explode that question. So you get a hold of a highlighter or a pen or a pencil and you start thinking, right, what type of question is it? So what skill am I going to need to be doing? How have I been taught to approach this? Your teacher is going to have gone over lots of different ways that you can approach these questions. Always check the focus or the subject of the question. Make sure you know what that question is asking you. Always check how many marks it's worth because that is going to tell you how much you need to write and how much space do you have to fill. That will really help you to make sure that on the longer answers, you are making that focus of the question your main point in your answer. Lots of times in the exam, people lose track of where they're going. And when they're writing, they start to wander away from that question. And the more they write, the further away they get. And obviously, the less marks you're going to get. So just make sure you keep that focus. What we've got here are some really useful vocabulary bits of information for you to help you show cause and effect. So these are the ones that come into the explanation questions, the ones where you've got to try and explain why something is happening. And so what you've got here is some really interesting causal connectives, and you'll be able to use those to link your points together to show why something is happening. I've also got these which are also for cause and effect, and it's really useful to have some of these to explain the relationships between them. And obviously, if you're struggling with the cause and effect questions, go back and recap the explanation questions that we went over. Both myself and Miss Davis will have gone over those explanation questions for you. Okay. All right, so in Unit 2, you're also going to get some proofreading and some editing. These are the ones where you have to fill in the gaps, where you have to choose the right word, where you have to check the spelling. I've got some examples tonight, but I've also done previous examples. So this is your first one. This is the Unit 2 editing section. So A13 says circle word. So you know that you don't need to fit that word into the gap. You have to choose the word and circle it. You don't need to try and squeeze it into the gap in the answer, okay? So the way I always go about this is I read through the question and in my head, I try and fit in the most likely answer. So festivals are always difficult for campers if the weather is bad. That, to me, that sounds like it makes sense, but I'm still going to try all the others. Festivals are extremely difficult for campers if the weather is bad. Oh, that makes sense as well. Festivals are sometimes difficult for campers if the weather is bad. Festivals are almost difficult if the weather is bad. Well, I know I can discount almost. Sometimes, well, honestly, festivals are going to be difficult. All right, so I need to think about that really carefully. And what I should be able to work out is that the first one is the most likely answer. And this is where you've got to weigh it up. It's not always going to be easy to choose between two of them. Sometimes you might have a 50-50 one where both of them could fit, but always have a go. Always take a guess. Right? If you narrow it down to two, then, you've got a 50% chance of getting it right. Okay. Then the next one, you've got to choose words that fit into the gaps. And again, this time you've got to make sure that the whole sentence is making sense with the word that you're fitting in. So organisers suggest that you should always bring stylish clothing. I know that's not going to fit in. Waterproof clothing, probably if they're talking about bad weather. Sparkly clothing, well, do you know what? You need sparkly clothing in a festival, but not if it's wet and raining. Do you want to bring summer clothing? Not if it's a wet festival. So you're going to need waterproof clothing. That's going to be the word I need to fit in. And then if you look at the second sentence, this means that you would be protected if the something became muddy. Well, stage, I know that's not right because I'm not on the stage. Car, I don't need waterproof clothing if I'm on my car. Tent, again, I don't need waterproof clothing if I'm in my tent. Site, that's probably the one I need. Okay, and that's always the way I go through these. I always work my way through them and try and work out the one I think is most likely. But that's only 3 marks so far. So I've got 2 more marks available, and this is the second type of question which comes up. This is the one where you've got to read through and you've got to put them back into chronological order. And you've got to then show that you've got them in the right order by answering the questions and saying which one comes third and which one comes fourth. When you're doing this one, you have to put all the sentences in the right order first. So make sure you spend that time, put them in the right order, label them A, B, C, D if you want to, if that's the way you want to do it, or add the numbers at the end, it's fine. But the right order for this one starts off with the we've found. That's the start of the story, isn't it? We found a tidy little spot. Our tent is up in no time. Well, you have to have the spot before you put up your tent. So in chronological order, it doesn't make sense to have those the other way around. So you know you've got to start with a tidy little spot, then the tent goes up. All right. And then it actually says, I go to offer my services to Lee and Owen. Number 3, because they're wrestling with the canvas monstrosity. So you can see that this is making sense in terms of the story. Then we've got the need any help, because that follows on from him going over to see what the boys are doing. And then Lee gives him a murderous look, which I take as an instruction to go back to where I came from. So you use the clues in the story to try and work out the chronological order. And once you've done that, you should be able to work out that sentence 3 comes third and sentence 1 comes fourth. And that's the way you go through it. And again, if you want to look at any more of those, just go back and have a look at the previous revision things on Carlam Cymru. Okay, so it's not just reading that you have to do in Unit 2, you have to do writing as well. And what I thought would be useful for you was to see the criteria here for the Band 5 mark, which is the top, your A star type of response. You're going to get marks for 2 different things when you do your writing assessment. You're going to get 1 set of marks for your communication and your organisation. How well have you put it together? How well have you structured your answer? How well have you made sure you address your reader, your audience? Okay, so this is the Band 5 marks. If you want to look at the other bands and look at the criteria, you can go on the WJC website and just click on the past papers mark schemes, and they're all there for you. So you can see what the mark scheme uses. Okay, so Band 5, it's mature, it's perceptive. It's sustained, which means you're going to make a nice long response. You're going to have techniques that engage the reader. You're going to use the appropriate register. That means you're going to be very aware of your audience and you're going to know exactly why you're writing and who you're writing for. And you're going to make sure that you are developing your ideas with detail and originality. And then it also says a secure and coherent structure. That means you need to plan. You need to know where you're going before you start, and you need to go through and you need to put down some ideas so that you know how to structure your response. Okay, and then you've got the assessment criteria for the writing accuracy. And again, you've got your range of ideas there. You need ambitious vocabulary. You need a variety of sentences. You need a variety of sentence construction, which is accurate. You need a range of punctuation. You need correct spelling, including complex irregular words. So it's about using a variety of vocabulary and spelling those words accurately. And it says a very secure command of grammar. So just making sure that you're really confident and that your basics are absolutely spot on, and then trying to polish your writing by adding in these extra details. Okay, so the examiner said that the best pieces that they read when they read the writing section were really lively, they were engaging, they were enthusiastic. They educated the examiners, so they didn't just take on the same old ideas, they had something original to say. And the best pieces gave the examiners an insight into what made the writers feel inspired. The best pieces always knew who they were writing for, so they had their audience firmly in mind, and they were nicely structured with 4 or 5 areas of discussion. Now that gives you a real clue there. When you're writing, aiming for 5 clear points. Remember, we've talked about this in the past. An introduction, 3 good main points and a conclusion. 4 or 5 areas of discussion. Nice structure to your response. It says topic sentences were used to introduce each new section. And again, in previous recordings, we've gone over topic sentences. So the exam board is interested in the quality of your writing. They don't want a formulaic response. So making sure that you know the keywords and you just get planning to get something really creative, detailed and accurate. Proofread, save yourself some time, check it at the end. Okay, so types of things that you're going to get asked to do. You're going to get a narration or a description task on Unit 2, and you choose one of the two, so you choose which one you want. You get about 50 minutes to write. You get, oh no, sorry, you're going to get about 50 minutes in total for this bit because you'll have done your proofreading and editing. So I would spend some of that time planning, but I would also save some of that time for proofreading at the end. Always worth checking it over. You're aiming for about 350 to 500 words, so you're trying to make sure that you get to that level. And it's always a good idea to know how many sides of paper do you take to write that many words. I mean, for me, it takes me about 2.5 to 3 sides to write that many words. But you might have smaller handwriting than me or bigger handwriting than me. So you've got to know where your sort of level is. Okay, so this is a really handy one. This is a brief sort of overview table. It shows you the difference between the narration, the description, and the exposition, so that you've got this sense of what it is you're trying to write in the exam. And remember that you're going to get 2 of these in the exam. You choose which one you do. Some really interesting tips for the extended writing. Making sure you paragraph your work is absolutely vital. So thinking about tip top, if you don't remember how to paragraph, tip top is the one where you change paragraphs for time, place, topic, or person. Tip top. Changing your paragraphs when you change time, person, topic, and place. Okay. This is how I teach mine to plan. I teach them PAFT, you might learn PAL, doesn't matter which one you use, as long as you start with this as part of your planning. So when you see the question, you know what you've got to do, you need to work out what am I writing, who am I writing for, how do I need to structure it, and what is my tone or the language that I need to be using. Okay, so it's really worth going through that before you start so you know exactly where you're going with it. And then here are some examples for you. So these are some description questions. Describe a time when you witnessed a busy sporting event. Describe a time when you witnessed something dangerous. So those are nice, easy description questions. There's a really good example. I'm not going to have time to go over it with you now, but all you need to do is have a look at that and just think, right, why is this good? Can I spot any of these techniques in it? Can I see what they've done to create a good piece? Then try and magpie those ideas or try and use those ideas in your own writing. So there's a good description for a good example of a description. And then you've got a narration here, some tips for narration and some possible questions. Write an account of a time, write an account of an exciting sporting or competitive event. Okay. Same again, I've given you a waggle. So there's a good example there with some examples of the techniques that you need to be using that will help you to vary your sentence structure and engage the reader. Then there's an exposition piece. Exposition is when you're trying to persuade the writer to take on your point of view, but you don't need to worry about using the persuasive techniques too much. Exposition is where you give your point of view. You might like to use some of the techniques, but you don't have to. But it's about your opinion, your view. And there you've got some top tips, making sure you use the quote, using standard English, it's quite a formal piece of writing, making sure that you're sensible and logical, and obviously using the reading text to help you. If you choose to do this essay task, your information, your facts can come from the reading section, and that is fine. There's a good example, all right? So a good example of one of the waggles on why money is important for teenagers. And again, some useful techniques you might want to use. And then there's some possible questions for you. I've just been doing the social media one in class with my year 11s, and it's quite a good one to look at to what extent you agree with it. It's quite an interesting one. And then there's I-spaced, which was mentioned in a couple of the ways to improve your writing. I-spaced is a way to vary the starting of your sentences. So I stands for the ing words or two-pair sentences. S stands for similes, trying to avoid the cliches. P, you could start with a preposition, on, in, or around. A stands for the ambitious adverbs, thinking about trying to use different ly words to try and create variety. C stands for connectives, trying to link together your sentences. E stands for the ed words, so the past tense, trying to create those ed sentences. And D stands for the dependent clauses, so you use fanboys to do that one. And then here are some grammar pitfalls that people often miss out in the exam, mix up in the exam, so it's useful to use those. and then we're on to Unit 3. So this is where we need to swap over now. So if you could bear with us for a moment, we're just going to swap presenters. Ms. Davis, can you swap for us?
Yeah. Okay.
Iawn, dwi'n gallu weld now, so right. Okay, so that one. That one. Right, it won't let me change the presenter.
Okay, now?
Right. It's not letting me change the presenter. Dwi ddim yn gadael fi newid y presenter, and it's telling me that obviously I need to go back to the window I was sharing to resume.
Okay.
So
If we go back to single source, have you clicked back to single source, Miss Hales?
I've clicked single source,
Okay.
send live for that one.
And then can you click my screen or me?
Yep, right, I've got you there, and then
the content.
But obviously if the content comes from me, I'm going to have to be clicking through the content as you go.
Well, if I click content up, hang on. Let me see if I can get it this way.
Right, there we are. So you've got that now.
I'll flick through quickly.
Yeah, there we are. That's fab. I think that should work now this time.
Okay, just as I make my way to where I need to be, just a couple of reminders then. Obviously, Miss Hales has gone over the outline of both papers with you. But here's just a little reminder of how the papers are constructed. So you've got the Unit 2 external examination, as Miss Hales has stated, which focuses on the narrative, the descriptive and the exposition. And then you've got the Unit 3, the one that I will be going over with you today, which focuses on the argumentation, the persuasion, the instruction. So just be mindful that a lot of the questions that are in Unit 2 also appear in Unit 3. So make sure that you do revisit, as Ms Hales also stated, revisit the recordings that are available on the Carolan website, okay? So the front cover here, again, it's important just to familiarise yourself with like the structure of the paper more than anything. So highlighters, as stated, will also be handy. So there's a reminder about the black ink, okay? Make sure you got the black ballpoint pen. And then a little bit differently, because obviously in this paper, the Unit 3, you haven't got the editing and the proofreading tasks. So you're advised to spend about 10 minutes with your reading in section A and 50 minutes answering the questions. And then differently, you've got 2 equally weighted sections. Sorry, not differently. So you've got 2 equally weighted sections, but you've got 2 tasks in section B. So B1 and B2. And you're advised to spend about 25 minutes on each of those 2 tasks. Okay, so that's the one thing that's different to the Unit 2. So the aim of the paper, so this is the argumentation, persuasion, instructional paper. It's testing your reading and writing capabilities, made up of 2 sections, around 15 questions in the first section, okay, but 40 marks to both sections, and the exam lasts 2 hours. So over the next few slides, I've got some kind of key revision tools for you to make use of. The item level data that as staff we get from WJC is basically lots of numbers that point out where the weakest answers are. This one, the synthesis task, is always the weaker answer. So I just wanted to make sure that we've got a slide essentially designated for this one. And as Ms Hales did state, it can appear in either the Unit 2 or the Unit 3 paper. Okay, so just some key points to remember with the synthesis one. So this is where you bring information together from more than one source. You need to make it clear which text that you're talking about. So whether it be text A, text B, text D, text D, whichever. Highlight what is asked for in the question. So the question will always have a specific focus. There is no comparison needed. Lots of candidates generally slip into that comparison, and that's often the issue with this particular paper. The synthesis will always be used, as in the word synthesis, in the question. So just be mindful to keep your eyes open for that. Make sure that you've got points from both texts and try to be as equal as you can between both, okay? So work through them, so point, evidence, and then quote, and then consider the title, the tone, language choices, the presentational devices, maybe from both texts, and respond to those in your answer as well. Okay, with regards to guidance for time for this, ideally you probably should, because it's worth 10 marks, sometimes 8. You ideally need to spend, you know, a good 15 minutes reading and answering this particular question, okay? And it will take up a chunk, but it is one of those high tariff questions. What we've got then, okay, are sort of sentence stems or sentence starters that will hopefully help you then to organise or structure your answers in section B more effectively or more efficiently. So you've got the argue, persuade, and advise here. So the argue here is, you know, you've got things like the most important aspect. So, you know, trying to show like your strength, like that there's strengths, making sure that you're writing with quite a definitive tone, confident tone, that you're assured in the points that you are making. With regards to persuade, then, you know, if you look at the first bullet point, for example, do they really think that? So posing questions, putting in those rhetorical questions, okay, really trying to engage with your intended audience. And then you've got, you know, things like you could make statements. And then with the advise part, you've got solutions, or you've got potential suggestions that you could possibly make. And sometimes it's bits like this, as in how to start the sentences, the students struggle with. So it's important to use tips like this and these sentence stems, these sentence starters, when you are practicing and you're putting together your example answers, or even if you're just practicing paragraphs. Once you start using these, having the mat, say, you could print this out, have it as a mat in front of you, and using that then to kind of guide your answers, they'll soon sink in and you'll soon start using them on quite a regular basis. You're probably quite familiar with these particular techniques, okay? The A-Forest, I think Ms. Hales also referred to that. So things like the scare tactics, shock tactics, okay? Really important that you use those. It allows for a more kind of emotive response from the audience as well, from your reader or the examiner, essentially. Things like appealing to hopes and dreams, self-image, flattery. Trying to bring in real life examples is often very effective. Bringing in sort of expert quotations, the chairperson stated, that kind of thing. Memorable phrases, using things such as a technique such as rule of 3, alliteration, using inclusive pronouns, so the idea of, you know, we together, we can, and ensuring that you do include that emotive lexis. If you try and keep that A-Forest kind of in your mind, my candidates, they generally, as soon as they get to the Unit 3 paper, they write it down on the front of their paper, and it's sort of their go-to, and it keeps them focused then as they work their way through it. Again, here what we have is just the grid, which will allow you to vary your use of connectives, simply just to make sure that your argument doesn't come across as repetitive, because we often find that it's, for example, also, next, to begin with, and it's very much the same throughout the course of the argument. So section B is deemed as quite weak in comparison to section A. So what we're trying to do here is to ensure that you come across as a confident writer and a confident candidate. So, you know, being able to vary your vocabulary and vary the way in which you start sentences is definitely going to be helpful for you in the future, okay? Right. Just a little bit of feedback here, and some sort of like do's and don'ts essentially that have come from the examiner's report from the summer examination. Okay, so here's some feedback. So saying that some omitted several of the longer and higher type tasks across both reading and writing. Okay, so the idea that they were left out completely. Okay, examiner's reported a significant number of blank responses, particularly in relation to B2 writing. The one with B2 is probably because of timing, okay, but we will deal with that a little bit later on. I'm just going to go through the question types. So with A2 on this current summer's paper, there was an answer of 3.8 billion. But if the candidate answered just 3.8 and hadn't put the word billion, okay, that would have been marked incorrectly. They had the right number, but they didn't have the right, they didn't state the billion. So it could be million, it could be, for example, it could be time related, it could be hours, minutes, seconds, it could be weight, it could be kilograms, it could be tons, it could be stone, whatever it may be, or however it's being measured, the number, it has to be, you have to relate it specifically, okay? So just be quite mindful of that. A3 to A5, so here's your multiple choice ones generally, okay? Need to be really clear when ticking a number in. So if you put in 1, 2, 3, 4, sequencing something, putting it in order. If you do have to cross things out, make sure you cross it out completely, okay? Try to avoid drawing arrows as much as possible, just to make sure it is completely clear for the examiner to see. A7 was the how does question this year. So how does the article? And what we found was that the tracking of the texture was key. So similarly to how the vast majority of you would approach your extract questions with your literature paper, the tracking is what you need to look at, then the close task focus is essential. So you'll have some questions like, for example, how does the writer show a specific attitude? How does the writer explain? How does the writer persuade? Okay, but the question aims to encourage candidates to read and understand the writer's arguments and how they are shown and put across to the reader. The feedback was that good answers or better answers concentrate on the content of the passage and they work their way chronologically through it. And just to point out that out of 10, you needed for 6 marks to start analysing the language. Okay, so that's where your kind of benchmark is for the 6 marks, is to start analysing that language. So your kind of PEA or PEE, whichever which way you go about it, the ones that you're familiar with in class. The summary, the answers are improving, but just a reminder, okay, I think Ms. Hales touched on it with regards to the summary, it has to be written in your own words, okay? So normally these are out of 5. They are expecting bullet points, okay? Makes it a lot easier for you and for the examiners as well, make their life easier, keep them happy. So normally out of 5, definitely try to bullet point them, but without a shadow of a doubt, you have to put this into your own words. You've got to reword it and rephrase it. If all you've done is quote, even if you've got 5 answers, okay, and you have quoted five correct things, because it hasn't been put into your own words, you will have a maximum, you capped at a maximum of 2 marks, okay? And then picking up on some others that were seen as potential problems, the what impressions questions. So here again, some guidance was to work chronologically through the extract, noting specific details and characteristics or actions that might suggest something about the individual. Try to suggest what the quote might imply about the character. Make sure that you have range, okay? So if you've got 3/4 of a page of an extract that is, say, for text D or text E, make sure you cover the text, okay? You're looking at the top, the middle, the bottom. Make sure you've got a really nice range. You really need to avoid bullet points. There are also some tables that we're seeing this year, okay? Avoid that as well. And some candidates really struggled with this idea of things like the tone and character and the different parts of character, like they miss things like sarcasm, the bitterness about an individual, personality traits, okay? So the anecdotal side is what's often missing, okay? And then we get on to the synthesis, okay? Like I've stated here, viewed as the weakest area, okay? If it's always synthesize text D and text E, for example, their attitude towards social media. It could be the feelings the writer towards the activity described. It could be why people bake, what robots can be used for. So there's various question approaches, but it's always 2 texts that are referred to. But if you only refer to 1 text, again, you're going to be capped 2 marks minimum, okay? Again, this idea that bullet points will hold marks back as well. Quotations or paraphrasing are acceptable, okay? And I've said, see the guidance, so flick back and have a look at the points on synthesis. Then we move to section B. So a lot of the issue with section B was that the content was quite short, little flair, lack of sophistication, with lots of basic errors. An issue was the fact that a lot of candidates were copying large chunks of the resource material. So you get your little booklet of resource material that you use to answer the questions. And, you know, don't get me wrong, it's absolutely, you know, it's fine to take bits of it, like Miss Hales referred to as magpieing, so taking little parts from it, and also picking out some of the ambitious vocabulary choices, again, that like was mentioned earlier. Pick out the ambitious vocabulary that's used in this reading material and work it into your own pieces, but don't copy wholesale chunks from it, okay? Little things like paragraphing, things that we all sometimes overlook. They're basic, okay? They need to be included. Capital letters, full stops, basic use of homophones, okay? They need to be priorities. When we mark as examiners, we do try to reward positively, but we have to underline every single error during the marking process, okay? So time management, like I said, you know, it's vital to kind of practice. In the Unit 3 writing paper, okay, in the June just gone, 90% completion rate of writing question. B2 is similar to 2017 when around 89% completed it, okay? So time management issues are quite prominent there, okay? So just some tips then with regards to planning. Again, Miss Hales did touch on this as well, this importance of planning. There's a lot to do, so you really have to plan your time really carefully. With both papers, make sure you read the extracts before you start on the questions. Consider the number of marks for each question. The fewer the marks per question, obviously the less time you should spend on it. And, you know, try and use that to gauge where you're going with regards to your timing and when you move on. Try to build a little time and to check your answers and to proofread at the end as well. Really important that you try all of the questions, okay? Make sure that you complete the examination papers to maximise your chances of accessing all the marks that are potentially available. They are supposed to link through, so try and answer them in a specific order, okay? Don't go jumping around and trying to, you know, do the big questions first and then the less demanding ones at the end, or vice versa. You need to try and answer them in a more organised fashion, okay? Again, things like reading questions, if they're asking for a list, they'll be happy with the list, okay? So some questions ask you to locate facts or make inferences. They're straightforward. And the WJC are telling you not to overcomplicate those, okay? Don't make it more complicated than what it needs to be. Selection is the main skill that's required, okay? Stick to the section that's specified as well, okay? So where questions relate to specific parts of text, make sure you don't stray outside the line specified, or if it tells you to answer based on text A, for example, often what you find is that it's in bold, so where the questions are on each specific text, okay? So ensure that you are answering on the correct ones. Similarly, when you have to look at two texts, make sure you're referring to the correct ones, okay? As well in the comparison and synthesis questions, okay? The examiner knows which text you're talking about, all right? They've read them beforehand, okay? Make sure as well you're reading those questions carefully. Read the question at least twice. And like Miss Hill was talking about, this idea of exploding the question, underlining the key words in the question is such a good habit, making sure you're looking at exactly what the question is asking of you. Pay close attention to the wording of the comparison question. Again, this is often this often misleads candidates. You've got to be really clear about the focus of the question when you're answering. Make sure that you support your comments with well-chosen vocabulary choices. You need to make sure that you're using appropriate evidence from the text if that's appropriate, okay, if that's required by the question. Like I said earlier about this idea of copying out large chunks of the text, it just wastes your time and you're not gaining anything from it. When it comes to subject terminology, okay, we want to know that you are able to identify devices, but it should never take you away or distract you from engaging with the text, okay? Don't use a term if you don't know what purpose it has, okay? It's pointless with the whole feature spotting. The what and the how questions, okay, so what happens, the sequence of events, the information is given in text is just as relevant as the devices used by writers. If you're looking at how a writer creates a sense of drama or tension, then look at what is happening, okay, so there's a few tips there. I've mentioned it already, this idea of tracking really carefully, really chronologically, okay? It makes sense in both papers to track through the specified parts of the extract when answering questions. It makes sure your answer is really coherent, it's fluent, it's logical, and it shows a recognition of the importance of sequencing as well, okay? And you have more material to kind of draw and base your answers upon later on in the paper too. With the writing questions then, okay, there's this reminder not to be over ambitious. Make sure you sort of keep it real. Doesn't mean you can't be an adjective, but make sure it's convincing. Often drawing on your own experiences definitely helps you. For the non-fiction tasks, you must be mindful of your audience. Miss Hale went over the PAFT or the PAL earlier, okay? Looking at purpose, audience, okay, so what task are you writing, what you have to write, who you're writing for, just being really mindful of that, because say for example the language that you use in a speech to your classmates is going to be quite different to the language you'd use when speaking to your head teacher. The purpose of your writing will also inform your choices when you begin your answers. It's important your writing shows awareness of the context that's been specified, so a letter should look like a letter, an article should look like an article, a report should take the format of a report, okay, so just be mindful of that. But again, definitely revisit the videos, the previous videos where there are examples of these tasks, okay. Just keep a close eye on your spelling and punctuation. Try to be mindful with your tenses, okay, whichever tense you write in, just try to use it correctly and try to stick to it, okay, instead of mixing or switching tenses. But more importantly, don't panic, okay? Exam papers are designed to allow you to show us what you can do, okay? They're not trying to catch you out. Most definitely use past papers, the sample assessment materials, okay, to make sure you're really honing in on your skills before the exams. All right, there's a section on the WJC website where you can access that. An example of that is this knowledge organizer that's available here. Okay, so there's a whole section. I've included the list at the end, towards the end of the presentation. So there's knowledge organizers from the WJC website that allows you to have a kind of a revision mat, essentially like this, for nearly all questions that are that you'll come across. Okay, so it gives you a checklist, it gives you top tips, it gives you some example answers, a definition, it tells you how many marks that you're likely to get, whether it's a high tariff, medium tariff or low tariff question, okay? So earlier on, Ms. Hales went over the criteria for a band 5 writing task, okay, where she commented on things like it has to be sustained, engaging, mature, well developed, okay? So she mentioned that was kind of your AA star sort of area. But what was also mentioned is that this idea to structure and plan is vital, okay? You need to know where you are going. And one thing that my candidates have struggled with is timing in section B, because they don't know how to structure their answers, or they don't know how to start. And they often ask, oh, Miss, how do I start? How do I begin it? Where do I go first? And what I've got here is just like how to structure a paragraph, like an argumentative paragraph or persuasive paragraph, okay? And we often use this, which is like a paragraph plan. So you'd have your topic sentence, you'd have then your explanation, all right? Then you'd have an example, like where you back it up, so you bring in facts. Then you have your consequences or descriptions, where you maybe bring in like your anecdote to kind of like push your opinion on people. Then you may kind of like undermine the opposition, or bring in like a personal anecdote a little bit more, state the effects on like on society or the world. And then you may end then, you know, discussing maybe what it would mean, so maybe for the wider community, for the wider country, the world. You could use a rhetorical question, link back to your main point, okay, conclude with some sort of emphatic statement. And if you sort of go about it with, you've got an intro, Then you've got 3 of these, okay? And then your conclusion. It gives you a really structured answer then, okay? So just being mindful of the importance of structure and ensuring that you are organised in your approach. The next slide then is just reminding you, as I mentioned, the knowledge organisers. So there is this bank of knowledge organisers that will definitely support the learning of GCSE English language. Okay, so there's a list there of the that's not all of them. There, it just continues down the page. So please use the resources that are available to you by the WGC that have been put together for your benefit. Like I've said, ensure that you do revisit the videos that have already been recorded by myself and Miss Hales. And hopefully you feel now that you are prepared for the November resit and you can go back, use the past paper questions, ensure that you revise and remind yourselves of the criteria that have been set and used by the examiner, and make sure that you practice so you're prepared to answer the different styles of writing questions. Okay, are there any questions, Miss Hales?
No, there are no questions, Miss
No
Davis.
questions. Wonderful. Well, best of luck to everybody in the November series. And hopefully we will see you soon.
Diolch yn fawr iawn. Nos
Diolch
da.
yn fawr pawb.